Kyle Myers-Scott. I'm the national organizer and spokesperson for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, which is the sponsoring organization for this webinar today. If you can see my video, this is my son Simon. It's nap time, so I'm trying to stave him off. We're thrilled to have Dr. Katharine Hayhoe with us today. Katharine is a dear friend. She's a climate scientist at Texas Tech University, a senior advisor for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, and we're just thrilled to have her joining us today to share some of her wisdom about how we can be the best communicators we can possibly be around climate change. We know the research shows that all of us are the best messengers for someone, and mostly more than just someone. So we want to figure out how to be the best ones we can be, and Katharine's a terrific teacher. So I want to be sure to stop talking and give her as much time as possible, but quickly by way of housekeeping, just a few items. There will be some time for Q&A at the end. So if you could utilize the chat box to chat in your questions, you should see that. You scroll down your mouse to the bottom of your window, you should see a chat option. If you just chat your questions in there, I will be sure to raise those at the end. We are also recording this, so be on the lookout for the recording afterwards, and be sure to share it with your networks. And also you'll notice that when you came into the room today, you were muted. We'd ask you to keep it that way, just so that we can keep down on background noise and make sure Katharine can utilize her time as best as possible. So just a quick word, you know, the title of this webinar, How to Talk About Climate Change at Thanksgiving Dinner, it kind of stemmed from a reality that a lot of us in Y.E.C.A's network face, which is that holidays can be a complicated time. It's a beautiful time of family and togetherness, but also often of awkward conversations where there's some tension between us and parents or siblings or grandparents, not least around the issue of climate change. So we wanted to try to equip ourselves and learn from the best about how we can handle those realities and those situations, how we can kind of preempt that and facilitate really positive conversations about climate change around the holidays, so that, again, we can be the best messengers we can be. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Katharine Hayhoe.
Thanks, Kyle. It is great to be with you all here today. And hopefully we're going to be having a bit of a dialogue or discussion as well. So let me just share my screen with you here. Hang on a second. Okay. And put it in display mode. What we're going to do is we are going to talk about this as well as me just talking to you. So what I want you to do on your phone or your laptop, go to pollev.com, and I already put it in the chat window. So if you want a link to click on, go to the chat window, go to pollev.com on your phone or your laptop, and it'll ask you to enter something. You want to enter Texas Tech, all one word. That's my university, so that's the code that I use. So pollev.com, and then enter Texas Tech when you're asked to. There's no need to enter your name. Anonymous is totally fine. So here's the first question. You're going to have to be good with your fingers on this one. Where do you live? And if you live outside the United States, please feel free to click outside. I'm from Canada myself, so I am sensitive to the fact that this does not encompass the known world. Okay, great. So it looks like we have good we have one person from Texas. That's awesome. Welcome. A number from Florida, a bunch from Kentucky, Tennessee, Midwest, Northeast. Oh, one from Colorado there. Excellent. California, Alaska, welcome. Somebody off there in the middle of the ocean. That's fantastic. Is that, let's see. I'm not even going to guess what island that is, but that's great. Okay, good. Now I'm going to ask you a second question. Ready? You guys definitely passed this test. Oh, I still see a few more coming in. All right. This one's going to be a little bit easier. This one is, who are you? So are you a middle or high school student? And some people have already gotten to this one. Are you an undergraduate student? Are you a graduate student? Or are you out of school making your way in the world? This is called Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, but the webinar is open to everyone. So answering D is totally fine as well. All right, it looks like we have about 25% college students, a few graduate students, and a lot of us who are already out in the world making our way. And no matter who we are, it's still hard to have those conversations. Okay, so one more question for you before I start. If you could have a conversation with one person about climate change that went well, who would it be? If you're going to use more than one word, though, you have to join in with a dot or a dash, okay? So if you're going to say my sister, you have to say my dot sister. You can't just say my sister. Good, you got it. Okay, so who would you like to have a conversation with that went well? And the bigger the letters here, the more people are giving that answer. So we've got our dad is number 1. Friends, pastor, President Trump, Leonardo DiCaprio, students, aunt, churches, parents, neighbor, cousins, sister, significant others, family, priest, coworker. All right. Well, luckily for the person who answered, Katharine Hayhoe, you're having that conversation right now. So your wish is hopefully answered as long as you feel like this is going okay. All right. So everybody, we all want to have a conversation. And what's really interesting here is church and churches and pastor. If you put those together, they would be number 1 here. Then you've got your dad, the president, coworker, friends, and relatives. So yes, we all want to have this conversation, and that's why we're here today. So what I have for you is I have some mostly very good news and just a little bit of bad. Here we go. First of all, the first piece of good news, and if you're asking me, did I create this template specifically? Yes, I did, for 2 reasons. 1, it's the Y.E.C.A color, and 2, it's Thanksgiving also. Does talking about it make a difference? A new study that came out this July found that talking about the climate change or global warming does lead to greater acceptance of the science. So talking about it really does matter, even though often we feel like we're just bashing our head against the wall. Specifically, what they found was this. Don't worry, you don't have to go read these things. I'm going to translate them for you. They found that discussing global warming with friends and family helps people learn important information. Like, yes, it has been warmer before, but today we should be getting cooler according to natural factors. Or even more importantly, scientists really do agree on this. And if over 97% of engineers agreed that the plane was going down, would you still get on the plane? Probably not. What this does is it increases, and I don't actually like this word, it increases beliefs that climate change is happening and human caused. I would say more knowledge or understanding, and knowing that scientists agree actually increases the frequency that we have these conversations. So their bottom line was that having climate conversations with friends and family causes a positive feedback loop where the more you talk about it, the more people know, the more they talk about it. Isn't that interesting? All right, second piece of good news. Can kids affect their parents' opinions? You may think, are you insane? Don't you know my parents? Well, I don't know your parents, but I certainly know several other sets of parents who may be very similar to yours. But another new study that just came out this summer too found that children can affect their parents' opinions. Now, what this study did was it specifically studied children who were middle school age. So look at it this way. If middle school age kids can do it, why can't we, right? It focused on North Carolina in a very conservative part of the US. And they found that parents of children who received information and education about climate change afterwards expressed higher levels of concern compared to parents whose kids were in a group that did not receive information about climate change. And here's the most important finding. Effects were strongest, believe it or not, among male and conservative parents who displayed the lowest level of climate concern before the intervention. So the people who were the lowest moved the furthest, and the coolest thing is they found daughters were particularly effective. Isn't that amazing? All right, so far, having conversations matters. Kids can actually make a difference on their parents' opinions. And, oops, going backwards here. Does this work if we're evangelicals? Well, I was involved in a study on this, as was Brian Webb, whose face I briefly saw here on Zoom. And what they did was they took a video of me talking about climate change, why it matters, how it affects us, what we can do to fix it, and why it matters to us as Christians. And they showed it to students at 3 different theologically conservative colleges. But although those 3 different colleges were theologically conservative, they were very different politically. So one was in the heart of Texas, ultra conservative, and climate change isn't real, that's just a hoax. And then there were people who were sort of moderate politically conservative. And then in Canada, it's not really that politically conservative yet, though Alberta is certainly doing its best to make it so. So it was pretty politically neutral on climate change. Anyway, they asked them a bunch of questions ahead of time about what they thought to determine where they kind of ranked on the spectrum. And then each class watched a video. And then after the video, guess what? They all increased to about the same level. So this is the same result they found with the kids in North Carolina. The most conservative parents moved the furthest. That's pretty good news. So, does this work for everyone? Here's the bad news. It does not work for everybody. And I find this study really helpful to kind of understand the landscape of where people are on climate change. So we often think that people fall into 2 groups, believers and deniers. And I don't like either of those words because climate change is not a religion, so we don't have to be believers in it. And deniers is a really kind of trench digging word. It's like, we are lumping you over there with those people who reject the Holocaust and things like that. And so it immediately sets people's backs up. But what the 6 Americas of Global Warming does, that's what this is, the 6 Americas of Global Warming, out of the Yale program on climate communication, they divide people up into not 2 groups, but 6 groups. At one end of the spectrum, you have people who are really alarmed about climate change. They talk about it a lot. They're really concerned. And at the other end, you have people who are dismissive, who talk about a lot also in order to dismiss it. And then in between them, you have most of the people in the United States. So the alarmed and dismissive we hear from most frequently, but they are not representative of the whole population. In fact, people who are concerned are the biggest group, and then people who are cautious. Disengaged are 5%, doubtful are 9%, and dismissive are 9%. So can we have a constructive conversation with anyone? We can, except for the 9%ers at the end of the spectrum. Those are the people that we cannot have a constructive conversation about. Why? Because they have made it part of their identity, who they are, to reject the idea that climate change is possibly real, not because they truly have a problem with basic science, but because they don't think there's any solutions that are compatible or consistent with their political ideology. And asking somebody who's dismissive to change their mind about climate change is like asking somebody to change a core part of their identity or even amputate a body part. And that never goes well. So we have to understand that for somebody who's dismissive, it truly, and I really do mean this, you'll understand, I'm sure, it takes a miracle to change their mind. We ourselves are not in the miracle business. We know somebody who is, though, and that's God. And I have seen a couple of miracles happen with dismissives, but it wasn't because of anything that I did. So what does a dismissive look like? My definition of a dismissive is somebody who is unable to conduct a civil and constructive conversation on social media. So people like this immediately, I would say, okay, clearly they're dismissive. But my personal definition is a dismissive person is somebody who, if an angel from God or Moses himself appeared before them with brand new tablets of stone that says global warming is real in foot-high letters of flame, they would reject it. That is somebody who is dismissive. And we all have one in the family. Now, maybe you might be the single lucky person who doesn't. I've actually met one person in the United States who doesn't. But for the rest of us, we all have one. I have an uncle. I will call him Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe had started a few years ago sending me emails, very, very, very long emails, saying all kinds of things about the science that weren't true. And whenever I tried to respond to say, well, Uncle Joe, I am your niece, and here is how we know that this is not true, and here's the science that explains this, he would answer in an increasingly escalated negative way to the point where the most recent email that I got from him last year was so condescending and so sexist that I could not even take it. My husband got an earful about how I felt about it. So the next time I saw my aunt, I said to my aunt, you know, I didn't reply. I said, what am I supposed to do about Uncle Joe? And my aunt looked me in the eye and she said, Catherine, on the email I sent you on May 8th, I told you to ignore Uncle Joe. Do not answer his emails. Do not respond to him. Do not let him draw you into conversation about this because there is no point. And I went back to my email and sure enough, she had sent me an email on May 8th and it was a number of months ago at that time. And it was quite a long email. And so actually it was at the very end that she had said, do not respond to Uncle Joe. And I was like, all right, my aunt is a wise woman. She knows. I was just talking to a dear friend just this week and she has a dad. And her dad begins conversations with her all the time. Conversations like, it's been warmer before. People have been saying that it's going to be a disaster and it's been disproven repeatedly. And all the scientists I ever talked to say it's not real anyways. So this is what my friend did. And I think this is very wise too. She said, Dad, you're wrong. So it's important to stand up and just say, no, that's wrong. But, and she said this after many, many times of this happening, so she knew where this was going. It isn't going anywhere, so there's no point continuing. But I love you, and I always will. So with the dismissive, we cannot have a constructive conversation. But if they bring something up, which dismissives often do, because talking about climate change is one of the most important things they do. If they bring it up around the table, it's important to just say, no, that's wrong. And it's always good to know a few things about why they're wrong. And that's why we have our global weirding episodes. No, it isn't just a natural cycle, Uncle Joe. That's wrong. But not to change their mind, but to show everybody else, the 91% of people who are listening, that there are answers to this. And we can have constructive conversations that don't end in fighting by simply saying, you're wrong, but I love you. So if you have an Uncle Joe, memorize that statement. All right. So at this point, you might be saying, well, all of that is great, and I feel slightly better about this whole thing, but I'm still not too sure. When it comes to a conversation, it's time for you to vote now. When it comes to a conversation, I am most worried that what? That I don't know enough, or I'm just not the best person to do this, or it's going to end badly, or it's going to be too depressing. And actually, I'm sorry, I didn't put an E there. Some of you may be wanting to answer E. Try to answer the one that bothers you the most out of all of these. Okay. So we've got, let's see, we've got 40, A is pulling, oh, no, A is sort of trying to, A is pulling into the lead. Is it going to make it? Should have sounds like a polling race here. Nope, it dropped behind. C is holding steady in the lead. 42, 43%. Oh, okay, I think I might call it. Most of us are afraid that it will end badly. And then a close second, I don't know enough, then there's, it will be too depressing and I'm just not the right person to have this conversation. I hear you. I have been in each one of those places. So regarding the ending badly, remember, end the conversation with I love you. It's hard for something to end really badly. Now, don't end it with, I will pray for you, because we all know that is the classic Christian passive-aggressive line, right? Like it sounds like I care, but my prayer really reads something like this. Dear God, this person is an idiot. Help me put up with them, and please, please work a miracle and change their mind. That's what I'm praying for you really means. So don't say that. But if you can tell somebody that, hey, I'm ending the conversation here, and if you can end it before it goes really bad, that's the key, before. Yes, you might have the answers to what they're saying. You might totally have those answers. But as we're going to talk about in a minute, those answers are not what's going to change their mind. And so if you can nip the conversation in the bud early, when you know it's going to end badly, and just say, you know what, I think we're just going to stop it right here because you're wrong, but I know we're not going to be able to agree about this. And I want to make sure you know that I love you. Okay. Now, I don't know enough, you may say. This is the second one. I was kind of hoping this might be at least the first or the second one. Because when you look at who's the best messenger on climate change, I was looking around for a summary of the science on this because there's too many studies to just pick one. And I found this great website, theclimatechat.org/messengers. So I do recommend this because it actually has links to all of the science if you want it, but if you don't want it, it summarizes it very nicely. And since I'm sharing my screen with you, oops, just a second here. Since I'm sharing my screen with you here, who's the best messenger? I'm going to go ahead and click on this so you can see what I found. So I clicked on this, and it said, who is the #1 group of best messengers? I don't know if you can see my screen here. Let me put it up to the top. The #1 best group is friends and family. So if you have friends and family, which if you're having Thanksgiving dinner, that's exactly who you have, friends or family, you're the #1 most trusted messenger. You're just the right person to talk about it. Why? Because as it says here, we trust peers who share our values and speak a common language. The more we trust the messenger, the more concerned we will feel about climate change. And Americans say their friends and their family are capable of persuading them to act on climate change. Pretty cool. So you are already the #1 group. Now, I was curious, so I paged on down the page, and literally I just saw this week, to see who group #2 was. And group #2 was scientists. And there was a familiar picture there. So it is true that people do trust scientists, but if you read the second thing here, scientists can be polarizing. So we are not necessarily even the best group. Friends and family, exactly who you are, is the best group. Isn't that cool? I hope that's kind of reassuring as well. All right. So when we have a conversation about climate change, what we don't want to do is this. Ready? We don't want to be Susie the scientist who shows up with all her scientific reports. Because to Calvin, she's showing up with information that doesn't say I'm wrong. It's information that says I'm bad. Who I am, my identity, who I have built my identity on is bad. Now, this is really unfortunate because what we should be building our identity on is our identity as a child of God, not our identity in terms of whether we're American or whether we like guns or whether we're against immigration. Those are not part of the identity of a Christian. We should be building our identity on who we actually are, not what the world says we are. But that's a bit of a different conversation. Maybe we could do that one for Christmas dinner. Anyways, those conversations do tend to end something like this, or perhaps being depressed. And as our second most popular global weirding episode says, if you're wondering what the most popular one is, it's what does the Bible say about climate change? As our second most popular episode says, if I just tell them the facts, surely they'll change their minds, right? Well, unfortunately, this only works if people are blank slates on an issue. So if I'm a blank slate on dark matter, and you have something interesting to tell me about dark matter over the Thanksgiving table, I'm like, oh, okay, dark matter. Sure, that's interesting. But climate change is very politicized. And so here's where the social scientists come in. Dan Kahan is a scientist at Yale, and they conducted a study to test if we just give more information to people, if that will change their mind. He found no, that people who were most scientifically literate, they knew the most about science, were not most concerned about climate change, they were most what? Polarized. And then he even developed a measure of scientific intelligence, which he called ordinary science intelligence, just to know how well people understand science. And he asked them, do you agree there's solid evidence that of recent global warming due to human activity, like burning fossil fuels? And he found a pretty weak correlation between intelligence and answering yes, which is the correct answer. And then he divided this into two groups. And what he found is that the smarter we are, the better we are at cherry picking the data that shows why we're right. So what they found was that people who were more numerate, better able to, handle numbers and facts and data and science, used their quantitative reasoning capacity selectively to conform the data to their political identity. Let me translate that. Being smarter doesn't make us more accepting of science. It just makes us better able to cherry pick whatever we need to validate why we're right. And here's the thing, we all kind of do it. We all do. The smarter we are, the more we argue with people about why we're right. And so simply having this type of argument is not going to work when it comes to climate change. It isn't going to work when it comes to whether you should eat yogurt in the fridge that's past the expiration date either. My husband and I have just decided to disagree on that one. We are not blank slates when it comes to climate change. And then you might hear people saying, as we do here in Texas, well, climate change is not a science, it's a religion you people believe in. You have forsaken the true God and you have turned to worshiping the created rather than the creator. It is nothing more than rebranded paganism. Climate change is the religion of the left who view prosperous America as the great Satan. These are real headlines, I didn't make them up. The problem, we all know, of course, is that Al Gore did it. And for the proof, all you have to do is look to the internet, because of course the internet has the proof for everything. And if you look carefully, you can see that somebody has actually photoshopped my head onto the choir. So we might say, clearly we should get the Pope to set them straight, because the Pope wrote this big encyclical talking about how global warming is real and it affects poor people the most, and our Christian values demand that we act. Or you could even look to the National Association of Evangelicals, because they beat the Pope to it by 5 years, or 4 years, I should say. They published a report connecting poverty to climate change 4 years before the Pope. So there's all kinds of global authorities explaining to us not only that this thing is real, but it connects directly to Christian values. But here's the interesting thing that happens. My colleague Ashley Landrum studies the impact of the encyclical on people's opinions. And what she found was this. If people who were Christians, Protestant or Catholic in the US, already pretty much agreed that climate change is real, even if they weren't too worried about it, after the encyclical came out, their opinion of the Pope went up. They thought more of the Pope after the encyclical came up. But if they didn't agree with the Pope, even if they were Catholic, after the encyclical came out, their opinion of the Pope went down. Isn't that crazy? So it really just affected their opinion of the Pope, not climate change, because the Pope was coming into conflict with their political identity. And here's what Galen Carey, who many of us know from the National Association of Evangelicals, said, which I think really hits the nail on the head. He said, the reason why many evangelicals oppose action to slow climate change is not on a religious basis, but politically, because they believe the government wants to what? Take away their freedom. But we don't want to say it's a real problem, but I don't want to fix it, because that would make us a bad person. And our self-defense mechanisms don't allow us to be a bad person. So instead of saying it's real, but I don't want to fix it, we have to say, throughout the smoke screens of, it isn't real. It's just a natural cycle. Those leftists are making it into a false religion. I worship the true God. Well, we all know, and this is not what we're getting into in this webinar, but we all know that in Genesis, it says we have responsibility over this earth and every living thing on it. In Genesis 2, it talks about how we are to tend the garden, to care for it. All through the Bible, it talks about God's joy and love in creation, nature that he has made. Then through the New Testament, it talks about caring for and loving the poorest and most vulnerable, the very people who are affected by changing climate. And then, of course, in Revelation, it says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. If you're looking for any more on that, let me actually just point you to the resource. If you're looking for any more than that, if you just go to our Global Weirding Series, weirdingseries.com, globalweirdingseries.com. Somebody can put it in the chat window there if they want to. And you look at our most popular episode, the Bible doesn't talk about climate change, right? This episode will actually go through the Bible and talk about what different verses there are that talk about, nature and not climate change per se, but our attitudes and our actions related to climate change. So last question then is this: is there any way to actually have a civil and positive conversation about climate change if just, loading people up with facts doesn't matter and hitting them upside the head with the Pope's encyclical or the National Association of Evangelicals report doesn't do it either? The answer to that is yes. It's yes with an asterisk, because it's possible for 91% of us. Not Uncle Joe, but everybody else we absolutely can have a civil and positive conversation with. How do we do that? Here's the key. We don't begin that conversation with what we most disagree on. So if Uncle Joe says something deliberately provocative, you could simply say, no, Uncle Joe, that's not true. Please pass the potatoes. Hey, everybody, what do you think of the football this afternoon? That's not the time to begin a constructive conversation. But if you're talking about something already like, oh my gosh, my cousin lives in California and they lost their home 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago in the Tubbs wildfire. And you wouldn't believe it, but they just had to evacuate again 2 weeks ago. They haven't even started rebuilding their home yet after it burned down because they can't get a contractor because so many people are trying to rebuild their homes. These wildfires are awful. They're thinking of leaving California. Yes, it's really bad. Did you know that all the fires in California are started by humans, which is crazy, but now they're burning twice the area they used to because of a changing climate, because it's hotter and drier. So what have you done there? You've connected this issue directly to your family, to your cousin. You've talked about, you've actually busted a myth, because people say we always have fires. Of course we do, and they're all started by humans in California. But we know that they're burning greater and greater area, and they're making it a lot worse. And then if you really wanted to go a little bit further, you could say, that's why the military calls it a threat multiplier. Did you know the military is really worried about this? And if you have some military members in your family, or if you are one yourself, that's a great segue there too. So what do we have in common? What do we already agree on? Our family, the places where we live, the things that we enjoy doing, birding, hiking. Are we members of the Rotary Club? In my TED Talk, which you should watch, I talk about how I spoke at the Rotary Club, and I was like, wow, they actually print their values on a 4-foot banner and they put it right up there in the door as you walk in. So I gave the 4-way test on climate change. And at the end of my talk, I will never forget, this man who came up to me and said, I never thought too much of that whole global warming thing, which is the polite Texas way of saying I thought it was a load of crap, but it passed the 4-way test. So I had connected to his value system and put it within his value system and showed him how caring about climate change was not opposed to who he was. In fact, caring about climate change made him an even better Rotarian than he already was. How much more is that true for us as Christians? So what things do I have that I can bond with people over? I'm going to do this exercise myself, but I want you to be thinking about yourself too, okay? So obviously I am a Christian. I go to a non-denominational evangelical church. That's a big way that I can connect with people. I'm Canadian too, so our Thanksgiving was actually last month, but we're willing to eat pumpkin pie twice. I live in Texas, so I often connect with people over what's happening in the places where we live. I have a child, I'm a mom, so I connect with people over, you know, what we care about with our children. And I'm a skier, so I care about having snow in the winter that we can enjoy. So who are you that you can connect with people over? A shared love for your family, a concern for the places where you live, a hobby that you both enjoy, a team that you connect over. I mean, they were concerned because in Dallas, they actually had to put a roof on the stadium in Dallas to air condition it because it was getting so hot that the team couldn't even play anymore. It was dangerous for their health. That's a connection if you're both fans of a sports team. And then we need to just connect the dots. So rather than trying to instill new values into people who don't want them, most people do not want new values, especially if they feel like they're being shoved down their throat. We're just connecting the dots between the values they already have, values that you genuinely share, and why they would care about a changing climate. Now, let me just stop there for a second. It has to be a value you genuinely share. I've had this conversation, this identical conversation now 2 times with 2 different men in 2 different places. And the last one was just last week. After one of my talks where I sort of talked about some of this stuff, a man came up to me and he said, I have been knocking on the doors of all the religious congregations in our city because I really feel like I should be reaching them with this, you know, with this message, because if you really believe what you say you believe, you should care about climate change. But I can't get my foot in the door of a single church. I get the door slammed on my nose every single time. What should I do? So I said to him, well, what's your own affiliation? You know, do you belong to a specific denomination or even a specific, you know, faith tradition? Because that's where you should start, because that's where you share the most with people. And he said, oh no, I'm an atheist. So I said, stop, just stop. You're not the right person to be reaching religious congregations. So I said, who are you? What do you enjoy? And he said, well, I'm a marine biologist. And I said, okay, so what do you do? He said, I work. I was like, okay, you can't work all the time. Do you hike? No. Are you a birder? No. Are you a member of the Kiwanis Club? No. So I started asking him a couple of questions, and finally he's like, well, I am a diver. And I said, oh, well, that's something. And he's like, yes, in fact, I do really deep dives. I've been down at 1,200 feet. And he got really into, you know, explaining his diving, and his eyes lit up and his face was beaming. I was like, that's the people you need to talk to. You need to be talking to the PADI certification programs. You need to be telling them what's happening in the ocean, how ocean warming and acidification is destroying the ecosystems and the coral reefs. That's who you need to connect with. So if you can't figure out how you genuinely connect with somebody, you're not the right person to have that conversation either. But often we can connect. We can explain how, if we're a farmer or a producer, we care about a changing climate because our crop yields are being affected or our water availability. If we live in the Midwest, our flood risk is increasing. If we live in California, our risk of wildfire is increasing. If we live in Texas, hurricanes are a normal part of life, but they're getting stronger and they're dropping a lot more rain on us than they used to. We know that wildfire is a natural part of the ecosystem across Western North America, but we know that with climate change loading the dice against us, we are seeing double the area burned by wildfire today than we would be without a changing climate. We know again that flooding is increasing, that heavy rainfall is increasing, that sea level is rising, and in Miami they're raising the level of the streets by 2 feet and installing pumps. We know that up in the Arctic, Alaska's sea ice completely melted for the first time on record this year. They had the worst wildfire season on record. In the most northern community in the US, their winter was so warm last year that people thought the weather station was broken. As one biologist said, the term is no longer climate change, it's climate changed. So wherever we live, we're seeing the impacts of a changing climate. We're seeing them in Europe, with increasing flood risk and heat waves becoming much more frequent. We're seeing them around the world, where climate change has already widened the gap between the rich and the poor by as much as 25%. Between some of the richest and some of the poorest countries. And just this summer, the United Nations said that climate change threatens to undo the last 50 years of development, global health, and poverty reduction. If that doesn't hit at our hearts as a Christian, I don't know what does. So if you want more information on how climate change affects us, the National Climate Assessment is a great resource. It has a chapter for every region. It has a chapter for every sector: agriculture, water, infrastructure, etc. And what we did with Global Weirding is we actually made an episode for every part of the US and one for Canada too, of course, I could not. So with just a very short video, you can get up to speed in a matter of minutes on what's happening in the place where you live or in the place where your family lives and how it's affecting people's lives. So for example, if I live in Texas, I actually tell people, I say, you know what? We have more weather and climate disasters than any other state in the country naturally. But that's why we care about a changing climate, because it's loading the natural weather dice against us. We already have a chance of naturally rolling a double six, and if you live in Texas, you already have 3 6s on your dice. But as climate changes decade by decade, it's moving another and another and another of those numbers into another 6. Wherever we live, we can connect the dots. And here in Texas, there's a lot of dots we can connect. Wildfires, dust storms, hurricanes, floods, droughts. We care about a changing climate because it affects us in the places where we live. And if we truly take the Bible seriously, we would be out at the front lines demanding action on this issue, because climate change disproportionately affects the poorest people in the world. This is where people live who are most affected by the impacts of a changing climate. They live in the poorest countries. And as they say in Texas, where they write the road signs, where they write the Bible on road signs, that love thy neighbor thing, I really meant it, signed God. We care about other people because that's who God has made us to be. And who we are is already the perfect person to care. We just have to connect the dots between what we already care about and why that matters to a changing climate. And then last of all, shouldn't have done that. Last of all, though, we have to talk about solutions, because that's the real problem most people have. Most people don't truly have a problem with the science. They have a problem with what they perceive to be the solutions. And so when we talk about solutions, that's where people say, oh, well, that's not bad. I could probably do that. And then when we feel like we're part of the solution, then all of a sudden we're okay with the actual problem, because it was the solution we had a problem with. So locally, I talk to people here about the fact that our university runs the city's recycling, and you can support 35 student scholarships by giving them your trash. Everybody likes to do that. I like talking about the fact that we have more wind energy in Texas than any other state in the country. The biggest military base in the US is running off 100% clean energy, saving millions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's a pretty cool talking point for Thanksgiving. We're already up to almost 20% clean energy by 2019. We have entire towns and even the first carbon neutral airport in North America in Texas. It's the DFW airport. So we can talk about the future and how there's more jobs in solar energy than there is in coal, and how the Museum of Coal Mining in Kentucky put solar panels on the roof. We can connect the dots for farmers, talking about smart ways to reduce the water that we use, or asking about, hey, have you looked into drought tolerant crops, or have you heard of carbon farming? And there's even organizations that will pay farmers already to do smart things like permaculture and no-till agriculture that put carbon back in the soil. If we had a price on carbon, they'd get even more money for doing that. I've talked to people in the oil and gas industry, and when I do, I share with them how thankful I am for the energy that they've provided, because if we had a life without refrigeration, without electricity, without transportation, without the medical advances of the last 300 years, it would actually be a very difficult life. And I acknowledge that many people live in poverty today, and those people need energy. But then I say, what is the future of energy policy? It turns out that the future of energy policy, senior Republicans are saying, hey, we should be putting a price on carbon. And guess what? ExxonMobil agrees. That's an interesting talking point. The future of transportation is very likely electric automated vehicles. That's a cool discussion to have. Uber says it's going to have flying cars soon. We can talk about what's happening in China and India. Did you know that they're blowing us out of the water in terms of new wind and solar energy installations and green jobs? That's an interesting talking point over the Thanksgiving dinner too. We can talk about what churches are doing. Putting solar panels on the roof, doing energy audits. We can talk about what individuals are doing. And if you have not signed up yet for climate caretakers, you need to do this right now, because every month you get an email that tells you something that you personally can do, something you can share with other people, and often something that you can pray about too. We can talk about how Morocco has the biggest solar farm in the world. Why is it in Morocco and not in Nevada or California or Arizona or New Mexico or Texas? Why does the UK have more offshore wind energy than the United States? Why does China have more wind and solar than any other country in the world? And they're selling their coal to Pakistan now because they've shut down all the coal-fired power plants around Beijing. And did you know that over 70% of new energy being installed around the world today is clean energy? Most of that in some of the poorest places on the planet where they don't have the money to build power lines and to build new natural gas power plants, but they do have the money to buy a solar panel and to set it up beside the side of the road and to offer people the chance to power and charge their cell phones and to run a business. That's pretty cool. So when we have that conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, the very first step is to bond over something that you genuinely share with the person you're talking to. And then look for little pieces of information that you could connect to it. Did you know about the sports team? Did you know what the military said? Did you know about job growth? That the fastest growing job in the US for the past 4 or 5 years, according to the Bureau of Labor, has been wind energy technician. Did you know? Find a factoid. Did you know? And also connect it directly to their values so they realize that caring about this issue isn't somehow foreign to who they are. It's who they already are. They just didn't realize it. So now it's your turn. I want you to think about this. You already said who you wanted to have a conversation with, but what value or belief, sorry, I misspelled that. What value or belief do they have that you genuinely share? And what's a solution they might not know about, but they might like that you could talk about? Like the fact that United Airlines is running flights out of LAX airport on biofuels. That's an interesting solution. Or that the World Evangelical Alliance is aiming to install solar panels on 20% of its facilities to decrease its carbon footprint. That's pretty cool too. So whoever it is you answered, I want you to think to yourself, what do they genuinely believe in that you share, and what's the solution they might be on board with? And I want you to take these two things to Thanksgiving dinner with you. Okay? So this is my last question to you, and then it's your turn to ask me questions. I know there's been questions coming in already. Who are you that makes you care about climate change? Who are you? Use a dot to connect the words if you have multiple words, but who are you that makes you care about climate change? And then, you can see where I'm going with this, do you share that with anybody that you're going to be having Thanksgiving dinner with? If you do, you're already on step 2, right there. All right. This is good. So we've got Christian, parent, lover of people and the earth. I wish all of us were that. Hopefully most of us are. Jesus follower, conservationist, hiker, lover of nature, student, person of color. I have children. I care about health. I live in Michigan. I'm a football fan. That's perfect. I love that. I care for the poor. I care about God. I'm a human. See this amazing list? This is who we are. And yes, oh, I love that. Scientist. Yes, I care because I'm a scientist too. We care because of who we are. And so our job is not to make people into something other than who they are. Our job is to show people that who they are is already exactly the right person to care. So how do we talk about climate change? We talk about it by bonding over shared values, by connecting them to climate, by explaining what people need to know, and lastly, by finding ways that we can work together to act. That's how we can have a constructive conversation that ends in a hopeful way. With the words of one of my favorite scientists, it is only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony that we can achieve our full potential. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katharine. I think I speak for everybody when I say, wow, terrific content. I'm going to be chewing on a lot of that for a long time. I think all of us will. We have some time for questions, and you all have sent in some terrific ones. So why don't we jump right into those? Katharine, I'd like to start with this one because it came in a few different ways, and I'll frame it this way. These kinds of conversations that we're talking about having and trying to learn how to have are hard. A lot of us have a lot of these kinds of conversations. How do you avoid defeatism or burnout in having these kinds of conversations?
Yes, that's a great question. And let me also say to you that you can add your own questions here at pollev.com, and you can upvote questions too. So we don't have time to answer probably all the questions, but if you want to write your question here or upvote somebody else's, please do that also. You can see there was an accidental one right there too. Okay, so how do we avoid burnout? That is really, really important. It's important to recognize that the burden of this does not rest just on our shoulders. And as Christians, we know that God is ultimately in control, and He is our ultimate hope and our ultimate salvation. So often we feel like, I just can't do any more of this. And you know what? That's okay. Don't, because it isn't up to us. We are not the Savior of the world. We have a Savior. His name is Jesus, and it isn't us. He lives in us, though, and it is His fruit that we're expressing. So when I feel like I don't have enough love, I don't have enough patience, I certainly don't have enough kindness, I don't. None of us do. And that's why we have Christ living in us, because that is what we can express to other people. That love, His patience, His kindness, His joy. And part of that involves going away. He went away to have time alone, to talk to God, to enjoy nature. If Christ went away when He was a human, we need to too. Enjoy our relationship with people, with family, with friends. Enjoy the amazing creation that God has given us. Enjoy our relationship with God. Recharge our batteries, refresh ourselves, rejuvenate ourselves, remind ourselves why it is that we care. Because sometimes we can be spending all our time doing and none of the time reminding ourselves, hey, this is why I care. And that's what we need to do. And I believe that's who we've been designed to be. We've been designed to be fruit. Fruit gets its life from the branches. You don't see a grape going, oh, I'm trying so hard to grow and I just can't grow any bigger. The fruit is dependent on the vine to give it that life-giving force. And that's who we're designed to be, and that's where our recharge ultimately comes from. So don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to, quote, take time off, so to speak. It is not being selfish. It's being who we are, who God's created us to be. Human beings in this world who enjoy his creation, his people, and our relationship with him. And when we remind ourselves of that, then I truly believe that the fruit of his Spirit can flow out through us. So thank you for asking about that. And that's something that I personally have to remind myself of all that time too. All right, we have a ton of great questions here, Kyle. Should we go with one of these questions, or what do you think?
Yeah, so what I've been doing, I've actually been inputting these into here. So these are the questions that have come in throughout the hour. Keep upvoting them, please. I see one for Y.E.C.A specifically. For the sake of time and to make sure we take advantage of Katharine's time, I can answer that briefly. I'll just say to the question of do we endorse climate crisis versus climate change language, we're agnostic. I mean, Y.E.C.A hasn't come down one way or the other saying we have to use climate crisis and not climate change. There's great research on both sides. We do use all of the above. So, you know, we're not hard and fast on that. I'll say, Katharine, a question that's gotten upvoted a lot is they liked the loaded dice image. What are some other metaphors that you have for climate change, like a metaphor to illustrate the difference between climate and weather or others?
Yes. Well, let me say I'm also agnostic on the wording because I believe the wording depends on the situation. So where you are and who you're talking to, I have had fantastic conversations with people where I've never mentioned the words climate and change together. And at the end, once, I literally had a woman say to me, I agree with everything you said because it just makes sense. Those people who talk about global warming, I don't agree with them at all. So our words are very important, and it's really important to pick them carefully. And one of the reasons we called our Global Weirding series Global Weirding is because I think it sort of fits, like it breaks the mold a little bit. It's not politically polarizing, but that actually is what we see. It's getting really weird. And climate crisis is certainly justified in terms of where we are in our carbon budget. And for some people, that's what we need to motivate us. But for other people, it might be an immediate door in the face. So we have to be wise with our language. So the loaded dice image, I do have other ones. And what I want to do is I want to really plug our global weirding episodes because we have one on climate and weather. And we also have one on geoengineering. And in the one on climate and weather, I talk, for example, about how weather's like a tree and climate is like the forest. It's the long-term average of weather of at least 20 to 30 years. So you can have hot days and cold days. You can have tall trees and short trees, but you can have an average for the entire forest. With geoengineering, we have to study it more because up until recently, there hasn't even been any funding for scientists to study it. And if some other country goes and does it, we don't even really know what the consequences would be. It's like giving a drug that hasn't even been submitted for FDA approval to every single person on the planet simultaneously. So geoengineering is a serious concern. And I think that it really needs more research. So if you check out our Global Weirding episode, it will get into that. I like the second question now. Might sharing stories about communities adversely impacted by climate change be more effective? Absolutely. So if you followed my template there, which I hope you did, I didn't talk much about the science, did I? What did I do? You bond over shared value, you connect it to why you would care, talking about what's happening to real people in real places is key, and then talk about solutions. So absolutely 100%. But for Uncle Joe, who says, while you're passing the potatoes, it's just a natural cycle, we have Global Weirding episodes, and there's a fantastic website called skepticalscience.com that answers all of Uncle Joe's questions. So whenever anybody says something like that, you can just be simply like, no, that's not true. If you're interested, there's a great website called Skeptical Science, or, you know, a great little video called Isn't It Just a Natural Cycle? That explains that by a climate scientist, and then pivot to talk right about a solution. Isn't it amazing that we have more jobs in solar energy now than in coal energy? Just pivot right away from the science into something related to impacts or solutions. All right, Kyle, what do you think next?
Yeah, why don't we do, because I've seen this come through in a couple different ways too. Could you share a few more tips or examples about how to start conversations in the first place? This came in as you were doing it, and I asked the questioner, and he said, yeah, if she could share a few more, that would be great. So a few more tips or examples about how to actually say those first words and actually begin this kind of conversation.
My favorite way to begin a conversation is with an interesting tidbit that will surprise people and not offend them. So I try to keep myself up to date on interesting tidbits, not in the science. And I am a scientist, so I'm talking about stuff I'm not an expert in. So if you feel like, well, I'm not an expert, that's okay, I'm not either. Interesting tidbits related to the military, aviation, jobs, clean energy, you know, the California wildfires, the hurricanes, whatever event is happening at the time. How do you get these tidbits? Just by reading a good news article, look at my Facebook page, you know, follow a couple of people who talk about this type of stuff on social media. And I love starting with, hey, did you know? And the did you know will relate directly to the conversation they're having. So I'm not just dropping a random topic in. People are talking about jobs, or people are talking about the military, or people are talking about, you know, cousin in California, or, you know, the relatives in the Midwest who are flooded, and, you know, I wonder if they'll be flooded again this year. So do you know? And then give them a little interesting fact. Like, hey, did you know that, like, you know, with all the, I probably gave you about 30 interesting facts in the course of this talk. Did you know that here in, you know, here in Texas, like I said, we have a carbon neutral airport. Isn't that crazy? And that then your goal there is for people to say, oh, that's really interesting. And then you can say, yeah, and you can sort of get warmed up a little bit there, but you've introduced it without dropping a brick. And you've also contributed to the conversation. So you're not trying to proselytize people. You're actually trying to engage and offer helpful information that you think they'd be interested in based on the topic that they already raised.
Thank you so much, Katharine. For the sake of your time and everyone else's, I think that we will end it there since we're less than a minute to go. But I just want to thank you again on behalf of everybody here, not only for this presentation, but for everything that you're doing for this movement. We're so grateful for your work and for your partnership. I would love to just close with a brief word of prayer, and then we can be on with our days. Let's pray. Creator God, we give you thanks for the beauty of your creation, for the ways that you have called us to serve you through serving it. God, it's no secret that conversations about climate change are complicated and emotional. But God, we know that you do not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power. And so God, would you send that spirit of power on each of us now to speak truth, to speak with love, to speak winsomely, so that we can be as faithful as we can in responding to climate change as followers of Christ. We give you thanks for our sister Katharine and for the knowledge that she shared with us and all of the great work that she's doing. Now, God, as we go our separate ways, would your Spirit attend us? We pray this in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks again, Katharine. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, that recording will be coming your way soon. Have a great day.
Bye.